Let's pray together. Lord, speak to us this morning. Speak to us through your word. Help us to see clearly what it is you would have us see this morning about who you are, about who we are, about what you've done for us. Amen. Hey, good morning. A couple weeks ago, at the beginning of the year, we started a new series that we are calling God Said. And each week we're looking through a different passage, a different part of Scripture in which God speaks, in which God says something to someone. And we're trying to read through those passages and see what God has to say to us through those passages. So a couple weeks ago, we started with Genesis 1, where you might logically begin this whole thing in the beginning. We talked about who God is, why he created. Then we went into Genesis 2. We talked about who we are, why he created us. And then last week, we read through that super fun passage in Genesis 3 about the fall, about how and when and where and why sin entered the world and ruined everything. And between Genesis 3, between the passage that we read last week and the passage that we're going to read today that Micah just read, there's not that many chapters, but things got bad, and they got bad fast. After Adam and Eve sinned, after they disobeyed, after they took from the fruit of the tree that they weren't supposed to, things got really bad really fast. So much so that in Genesis 5 and 6, it tells us that how bad things had gotten. It says this, that the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth. And it grieved him to his heart. The things got so bad so fast when sin entered the world that the Lord regretted that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him to his heart. Because he saw the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it broke God's heart. He looked at man now, no longer in perfect relationship with him, no longer in perfect relationship with creation and with each other. None of that anymore. Sin ruined all of that. And now he looks at man, and what does he see? The great wickedness, and how every intention of his and every thought of his heart, only evil all the time. That's the new reality. Mankind, only evil all the time. And it broke God's heart. Because he looked at man, who he created for perfect, intimate, loving relationship with him. All the stuff we've been talking about the last couple of weeks. That's why he created man. And now he looks at man and no longer sees perfect anymore. He no longer sees righteous and good anymore. What he sees is only evil all the time. And it grieved him. It pained him to see that, to know that. And he knew that as a good, righteous, holy God, there was only one way to deal with how bad things had gotten, and it was this thing called a flood. Most of us are at least somewhat familiar with the story of Noah and the flood, which is why we are not reading Genesis 6 and 7, and we're reading this passage when they get off the boat. So what happens, in case you're not familiar with it, God comes to Noah. The Bible says that there was one man left who found favor in God's eyes, and his name was Noah. By the way, it feels a little bit weird talking about Noah this morning, just a tad. So forgive me if I start, I don't know, so something weird happens. So, but anyways, there was one man that found favor in God's eyes, and his name was Noah. And God comes to Noah and he says, hey, there's going to be this flood. I'm going to wipe off all life off the face of the earth. I'm going to destroy everything off the face of the earth because of how evil it's gotten. But I want you to build a boat, a big boat, a really, really big boat. And I want you to take 2 of all these kinds of animals with you and 7 of all these kinds of animals with you and all kinds of food. And don't forget your families. Don't forget your family. Bring them too. And then it's going to rain. And it's going to flood. And everything else is going to die. Except you and what's on this boat with you. And however absurd it may have seemed to Noah, the Bible tells us over and over and over again that Noah did all that the Lord had commanded him. Noah did exactly like God had commanded him. And just like God said, the flood came and the waters rose and everybody and everything on the boat survived and everything that wasn't didn't. That's what happens in Genesis 6 and 7 and most of 8. And that's what we're going to pick up this morning, this passage that Micah just read. That's what we're going to pick up. But before we do that, there's a couple of things that we need to talk about first. So in Genesis 3, we saw the fall. We read about the fall. We read about how sin entered the world and how because of sin, nothing's like it's supposed to be anymore. The way that God created it, the way that God created our relationships with Him, with creation, with each other, none of it's perfect anymore. In fact, all of it is ruined. All of it is only evil all the time now. Sin ruined everything. Nothing is like God created it to be. Nothing is. It warped and twisted and ruined man's relationship with God, man's relationship with creation, and man's relationship with each other. It is no longer what God intended it to be. Perfect, loving, communal relationship between God, creation, and man. That's what it was supposed to be, and now it's none of that anymore. And only in a couple of chapters in Genesis, things got really bad, really fast. And this is it's a necessary point we have to make first. Can you change that next slide for me? Is this, and this is what Genesis 3 reminds us, that sin has ruined our relationships with God, creation, and each other. It's the first blank in your outline if you want to fill that out and follow along. Sin has ruined everything. This is a very core, important doctrinal belief if you're a Christian. Sin has ruined everything. That God didn't create us for this, but this is reality. And so, I think the question now the reason I chose this passage, I look at this because to me, the passage that we are going to read this morning, this is what it's all about. It's all about answering this question. Okay, sin is real. God is still real. We're still real. God still wants a relationship with us, but sin has ruined everything, so now what? Because we believe Genesis 1 and 2 and 3 and those truths, that God created us for this. We believe that sin is real and that it's ruined everything. But now what? What do we do now? Where could we possibly go from here? Because sin's still real. So if sin's still real, isn't this world just going to be in an endless cycle, a revolving door of judgment and destruction? Doesn't that make sense? That it got so evil so fast, and that if sin still is real, if sin still exists in Noah and his family, if sin also survived on the boat, then isn't it just going to be this revolving door of destruction? That's the question that this passage is answering. Sin is real, now what? Sin is real, so now what? And this passage shows us something incredibly awesome. Can you throw up the next slide, please? Despite sin, there's still hope. Sin is real, sin has ruined everything, but there is still hope. There's still hope for a remedied relationship with God, creation, and each other. This perfect community that God designed us for that's been ruined, there is still hope. In spite of sin, there's still hope for all of that to be remedied. There's still hope for all of that to be made right. And again, this is also a core doctrinal belief. Sin has ruined everything, but there's hope. There is a way forward. And Genesis 8:20 through 9:17 is God showing us this is the way forward. I have just wiped off the face of the earth all human life except you guys, and all animal life except you guys. I've killed everything else because it was so evil. Sin is still real. Now what? Where do we go from here? That's what this passage is all about. So quick breakdown. There's kind of 4 parts of this passage. The first couple of verses are God saying, this is how I'm going to start fixing my relationship with you. This is how I'm going to partially fix man's relationship with God. And then the next portion, which is verses 9, 1 through 4, is God showing us how He's beginning to remedy our relationships with creation. And then the next portion, verses 5 through 7, are how God begins to remedy our relationships with each other. And then the last portion, the big last chunk all about the covenant, that's what it's about. It's God saying there is a covenant of mercy upon which all of this is founded. So that's a quick breakdown here. So let's look at the first portion here, verses 8 through 22, where God shows us how He is beginning to remedy our relationship with Him. This is what it says. Then Noah built an altar to the Lord and took some of every clean animal and some of every clean bird and offered burnt offerings on the altar. So imagine this. You've just gotten off the boat. You've been on the boat for like a year with a bunch of animals and your family, and you've watched all life be snuffed out on the earth. And finally, the waters start to recede, and you get out, and you step on dry land, and what's the first thing you do? What's the first thing Noah did? And then Noah built an altar to the Lord, and he worshiped God. The very first thing that Noah did when he got off the boat was worship God. That's what these sacrifices on the altar are all about. It's about Noah giving thanks to God for deliverance and pleading with him for further deliverance, knowing that sin is still real, that sin still plagues him, that sin still plagues the world, and he's pleading with God for forgiveness. He's worshiping God. And these offerings were burned so that the aroma in the flames and the smoke would rise up to God. That's what it says there, that they were burnt offerings. And then what happens after Noah worships God? Verses 21 and 22, and when the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma, the Lord said in his heart, I will never again curse the ground because of man, for the intention of man's heart is evil from his youth. Neither will I ever again strike down every living creature as I have done, while the earth remains, seed time and harvest, cold and heat, summer and winter, day and night shall not cease. It says that the Lord smelled the pleasing aroma. Now, if you're a smart person, you're probably thinking, wait a second. Burning animal carcasses, pleasing aroma? What? That doesn't sound particularly like a pleasing aroma. Now, I don't know a whole lot about how God's sense of smell works, but I'm assuming that it's not exactly the smell itself that is pleasing to God of the burning animals. So what is it then? Well, the word pleasing means soothing. The word pleasing means tranquilizing. It means calming. So when it says that the smell of the aroma, the pleasing aroma, it says that it's soothed to God. It was soothing to God. It soothed his wrath. It soothed his anger toward man. So then what was it? If it wasn't the smell of burning animals that soothed God's wrath, what was it? Noah's worship. Can you put the next slide up, please? This is the way that God begins to partially remedy our relationship with him. And you see it right here in these verses. That he partially remedies our ruined, broken, messed up relationship with him by accepting our faithful, obedient worship. But he doesn't have to do it. He mercifully accepts it. He's not required to accept our worship. Our worship isn't good enough to make us right with him. He accepts it because he is merciful, because he looks upon us mercifully. In verse 21 there, where it says, for I will never again curse the ground because of man, for the intention of man's heart, probably a slightly better translation is although, even though. Even though, then, what God is saying, even though man is only evil all the time, even though man is evil from his youth, even though man has totally ruined everything, even though he's let sin and disobedience ruin everything, even though I will not destroy all life on earth again. Even though man is sinful, even though man has ruined everything, I will show mercy. Again, not because I have to, not because Noah deserves it, but because I am merciful. And with the pleasing aroma of Noah's worship in his nostrils, this is what it says, that God chose mercy. He chose to look upon man and look upon creation more mercifully than it deserves. That all of man and all of creation, because of sin, is totally deserving of nothing but flood after flood after flood after flood. But God looks at Noah's worship and he takes in Noah's worship. And then he resolves in himself, he said in his heart, I will never curse the ground like that again. I will never destroy life like that again. His mercy is needed for our relationship to be right with him, and our worship is needed for our relationship to be right with him. It's about relationship. Noah's worship, God found pleasing because he is merciful. And that's how he begins to remedy our relationship with him. Worship. Worship. Isn't that encouraging to know that in spite of sin, that despite sin and despite how polluted we are, that God is still pleased with humble, faithful, obedient worship? That better be good news because you're still plagued by sin. I'm still plagued by sin. To know that God mercifully accepts our worship, again, not because he has to, but because he's merciful. And to know that this is part of where rightness with God is reestablished. worship. And it's why Noah, it was the first thing that he did when he got off the boat. He worshiped God. He mercifully accepted the worship. And then, that's how God partially starts to remedy our relationship with him. The next thing, because that wasn't the only relationship that was ruined, we also have a ruined relationship with creation. This is what God has to say, starting in verse 9, or in chapter 9, verse 1. And God blessed Noah and his sons, and he said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. The fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth and upon every bird of the heavens, upon everything that creeps on the ground and all the fish of the sea." That's everything. "Into your hand they are delivered. Every moving thing that lives shall be food for you, and as I gave you the green plants, I give you everything." Man's relationship with creation had been ruined too. Remember what it was supposed to be like back in Genesis 1? It was supposed to be this loving, caring relationship between man and earth, man and creature. And these words here are very similar to that which God gave to Adam in chapter 1. Be fruitful, multiply, have dominion over the earth. Remember that? That was part of God's directive to man. And it's very similar, except now, in light of sin, because things have changed, it's a little bit different, isn't it? It's not exactly the same words. The relationship isn't about loving care anymore. The relationship between man and creation isn't about loving, kind care anymore. What does God say the foundation of this relationship is in verse 2? Fear and dread. Things are ruined here. The way that you were supposed to relate and interact with creation has been ruined. The relationship has changed. And now, creation is not going to see you as their loving, caring overseer anymore, their loving, caring steward. What they're going to see you with is fear and dread. And part of the reason that they're going to see you with fear and dread is why? Because you can eat them now. That makes sense. Animals know that we might eat them, and so they are filled with fear and dread. This is a changed relationship. Sin has ruined this. God is now telling man, you can eat these animals. He said, just like I gave you all the green plants, I'm now giving you all of animals to eat. You can now eat from them. The man probably didn't eat animals before. Not much. And now God is very clearly saying, you can eat them now. Typically, you don't have a super healthy relationship with something if you can eat it. And this is happening here. This is ruined now. This relationship with creation has been ruined. But, just like God's relationship with man, there's a way forward. God's saying, I've got a new trajectory here. There's a new path here. Can you throw that next slide up, please? This is the new trajectory that God begins to partially remedy our relationship with creation by mercifully, again, not because he has to, but because he wants to, because he is loving, because he is merciful, providing for us and protecting us. Because this relationship has some because of sin. But there's one prohibition made. What does he say in verse 4? You shall not eat the flesh with its life, that is, its blood. The only prohibition, the only limitation here is you can't eat them while they're alive. And you can't eat them while they still have the blood in them. I could talk about this for a long time, but the reasoning here is probably multifaceted. One being just God values animal life. He does. But even more importantly, I think here that what it's teaching is that God doesn't want man to shed blood unnecessarily. I'm giving you dominion over them. I'm allowing you to take from them, to maintain your life, to take their life, to sustain yours, but not to shed blood unnecessarily. And I think part of the reason is that the more we shed animal blood unnecessarily, the more likely it is that we shed human blood unnecessarily. And so anyways, we've got this messed up relationship between man and creation, and God says, here's how I'm going about fixing it. Here's the new trajectory. I'm going to provide for you. Because of sin, because I've wiped all life off the earth, I'm still going to provide for you. Creation is not going to be as bountiful and as pleasant to work as it was, right? That was part of the curse. And God is saying, even though there's this ruined relationship between you and the earth and you and creation, I'm going to provide for you. I will give you what you need. I will provide for you. And the second thing that he does, the second aspect of it is protecting. And we see this in the next couple of verses that overlap a little bit. Verse 5, says, "And for your lifeblood I will require a reckoning. From every beast I will require it, and from man." So here's that protection part. God says every beast that takes human life. Now, how he enforced this, I'm not totally sure. But if a beast, if an animal takes human life, sheds human blood, there will be a reckoning. I will judge that because I value human life so much. And because guess what? You don't have a great relationship with creation anymore. And now there are lions and tigers and bears. Oh my. We don't have great relationships. There are predators now. But God says, I will protect you. Your relationship with creation has been ruined, and yet I will provide for you and I will protect you. This is the new trajectory. It's the new path forward. And then lastly here, coming into these verses, we see God start to talk about how to remedy our relationships with each other. So he begins to remedy our relationship with him through humble, obedient worship, by mercifully accepting our worship. And he begins to remedy our relationship with creation by providing for us and protecting us. And now here comes the man relationship, the relationship between men. And this is what it says in the second part of that verse. "From his fellow man I will require a reckoning for the life of man. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed. For God made man in his own image. And you, be fruitful and multiply, increase greatly on the earth and multiply in it." If God values animal life so much, imagine how much he values human life. Imagine how important and how great worth human life must have to God. So much so that he says, if human life is shed, there will be a reckoning. If human life is taken, if human blood is shed, there will be a reckoning. That's how seriously I take this. By the way, sin-motivated violence was probably the primary reason that the flood came. In Genesis 6, 11 through 13, you can go look at it. God mentions violence twice. He doesn't mention really anything else. He mentions violence twice when he's describing the primary manifestation of sin in mankind. Violence. Has that changed? Look around, man. Violence. Nothing destroys human relationships like violence. Nothing destroys human relationships and worth in each other's eyes like violence. Sin ruined our relationships, right? Remember when Adam and Eve hid themselves from each other? They didn't have perfect relationship anymore. Remember when they started blaming everybody else? They don't have perfect relationship anymore. And then things got really violent. The chapter we didn't read, chapter 4, what happened in Genesis? Cain killed his brother Abel. And the violence got crazy bad fast. Violence. And so God is giving a mandate here. And the reasoning behind it is key. When he says, "From his fellow man I will require a reckoning. Whoever sheds the blood of man, by man shall his blood be shed." The next part of that verse tells us why. It's not just because God is a vengeful God. Why? Man is still in God's image. Now, this is pretty important. This is huge because sin ruined a lot of things, right? Sin ruined everything. But it's really important to know that this matters because we are still in God's image. Is sin a reality in us? Yes. Is sin a reality in this world? Yes. Does sin plague every single one of us? Yes. But we are still in God's image. Sin didn't take that from us. Human life is still of value to God. Human relationships are still desired by God. We are still made in God's image. He's reaffirming something that this is really important. God is reaffirming you have value. Are you plagued by sin? Yes, but you have value in my eyes. For the same reason that you've always had value in my eyes. That you are made in my image and in my likeness. All of you. Everybody. And this is, can you put the next slide up? Oh, you already did. Nope, sorry, go back to the last one. This is the point here. This is how God begins to remedy our relationships with each other. By reminding us that we are all made in God's image. How many relationships might be healed or remedied or at least made some progress if you started seeing the people around you, everybody, all the time like God sees them? as made in His image. Sinful, but in His image. Sinful, but worth loving. Sinful, but deserving of mercy. What if we all started to see each other like that? Our relationships, our broken human relationships would start to be remedied. They'd be progress. They'd be a path forward. And then God says in verse 7, "And you be fruitful and multiply, increase greatly on the earth and multiply in it." You are not to take life. You are not to shed human blood. You're not to ruin life. You're supposed to bring it forth. You're supposed to create life, not take it. This is the foundation for human growth and for human relationships, for healthy human relationships, is seeing each other like God sees us, as made in His image. That's the new trajectory for our relationship with each other. Knowing that though sin is real, though sin still haunts us and ruins our relationships, that the way forward toward remedying those wronged relationships and making them right is by seeing everybody around us as made in the image of God, as having value and having worth, and worthy of mercy and love. So really quick summary here, verses 8:20 through 9:7. Sin has ruined our relationship with God, creation, and each other. And God has provided a partial remedy. I emphasize that a lot in all of these three sentences because these are partial remedies. They don't get us all the way there, right? Mankind's humble, obedient worship of God, it doesn't get us all the way there. It doesn't make everything all right again. It makes a way forward, but it's just a partial remedy. And likewise with creation, those things there, God providing and protecting us, that doesn't make everything right again. The relationship is still kind of ruined. It's still kind of off. It's just a way forward. And likewise, just if I start to see you guys all in God's image, it doesn't mean I'm going to stop being sinful. It doesn't mean I'm going to start treating you all like you deserve every time, because sin is still real. These are all partial remedies. But the rest of this chapter, verses 8 through 17, is going to show us where the total remedy is, where the perfect remedy comes from. So let's read through it real quick. Then God said to Noah and his sons with him, "Behold, I establish my covenant with you." Look, that's what it says. Behold, look, take this in. I establish my covenant with you and your offspring after you, and with every living creature that is with you, the birds, the livestock, and every beast of the earth with you, as many as come out of the ark. It is for every beast of the earth. I establish my covenant with you, that never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of the flood, and never again shall there be a flood to destroy the earth. And God said, "This is the sign of the covenant that I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for all future generations. I have set my bow in the cloud, and it shall be a sign of the covenant between me and the earth. When I bring clouds over the earth and the bow is seen in the clouds, I will remember my covenant that is between me and you and every living creature of all flesh. And the waters shall never again become a flood to destroy all flesh. When the bow is in the clouds, I will see it and remember the everlasting covenant between God and every living creature of all flesh that is on the earth." And God said to Noah, "This is the sign of the covenant that I have established between me and all flesh that is on the earth." Repetition much? A lot of verses here saying things. God is saying, I am establishing a covenant with you. I'm establishing a covenant not just with you, Noah, not just with your family and your offspring and generations down, but I'm establishing a covenant with all of creation, with all flesh. There's three really important things to note here. This is the covenant of grace, by the way. This is that same thing. God's saying, I'm not going to destroy man like that again. I'm not going to destroy life like that again. This is God saying, this is a covenant of mercy. I am promising you mercy. I am promising you more merciful treatment than you deserve. And there's three really important components of this. The first thing is that it wasn't just to Noah. It was to all of creation. It was to all flesh. Every time that God mentions the covenant, He makes it clear it is to all flesh. Forever. All generations. All offspring. The covenant is not just with Noah. It's with all of creation. God doesn't just say, I'm going to treat man more mercifully than he deserves. He says, I'm going to treat this whole sin-plagued universe more mercifully than it deserves. And the second thing to note is that, did you notice this? When you think of a covenant, you think of two parties, right, agreeing on something. Does Noah say anything? Do the beasts of the field say anything? This is an unconditional covenant. God is simply making a promise. But it's deeper than a promise. It's a covenant. He's making a covenant, an unconditional covenant. Nothing about this promise is contingent upon us. Thank goodness, right? Nothing upon this promise of mercy has anything to do with how good we are, how deserving we are, because we are only evil all the time. And every intention is evil from our youth. It has nothing to do with us. It's purely by mercy. Mercy. It's a covenant of mercy. And then the third thing here, is really important also. That it was sealed with a sign. What's the sign? The rainbow. All covenants were sealed with signs or symbols that helped reinforce and remind people what the covenant was all about. But an interesting thing here, well, he sets the rainbow in the sky. But by the way, this is the word bow is used about 50 times in the Old Testament, and only once is it ever translated rainbow, and that's here. And every other place in Scripture, the word actually means like a hunting bow, like a war bow. And so when you think, it gives us a beautiful picture. This sign, the symbol of this covenant of mercy that God is making is his war bow hung up. Not needed anymore. Because he's promising mercy. He's mercifully accepting our worship. He's mercifully providing a way forward. And so he has hung up his bow of wrath in the sky. He says, every time that I see it, I'm going to remember that I am being merciful to you. That I'm not pointing the bow at you anymore. Kind of like in the shows when you see people like carelessly handling a gun, right? Or something and it points at you. It's, whoa! We don't have to worry about that. The bow is not pointed at us. The bow is not pointed down because God is choosing mercy, not judgment that we deserve. But it's not pointed at us. Where is it pointed? Where is the rainbow pointed? Where is the war bow of God pointed? Up. At God. And it's a beautiful picture. Rainbows are beautiful. Every time I see a rainbow, I just stop. It captures me. And even more than the beauty of that rainbow that captures me, this should capture me. The reminder that God's mercy, that a covenant of mercy doesn't come cheap. That God didn't change his character. He is still wrathful against evil. He still hates sin. He still hates evil. But what God is saying here, what God is covenanting, what he's promising, is not that I'm not going to be just, or that I'm not going to be good, or that I'm not going to be wrathful against sin. What he's promising is, you're not going to be the object of my wrath anymore. The bow is pointed up. I will become the object of my wrath. And this is Jesus, isn't it? God saying, I am not going to, because I want to show you mercy, because I love you, because you're made in my image, and because I value you, and I want to redeem wholly, not just partially anymore, but wholly redeem this relationship with you. And the only way, because of your sin, remember, that's the question. Where do we go from here? We're all haunted by sin. We're all plagued by sin. So where do we go from here? This is where we go. This was the only way to a full remedy. It's the only way to a perfect remedy. Can you put the next slide up, please? This is the perfect remedy. God perfectly remedies all ruined relationships through Jesus. That all those other things are just partial remedies. They only get us halfway there. They only start to fix things. And that it's only in Jesus that we have a full remedy. When God took the wrath on himself on the cross. The rainbow reminds us of that. What a more beautiful picture to remind us that God has taken wrath upon himself so that we could have mercy. So that we could experience mercy that we don't deserve. Because Jesus experienced wrath that he didn't deserve. That we deserved. The rainbow reminds us that the storm passed on us because Jesus took the storm on himself on the cross. And that because Jesus took the storm on the cross, we can live in light and in beauty again. Noah was the faithful one who trusted God, who was obedient to God, who did all that the Lord commanded him, and mankind was delivered. Verses Genesis 5, 28 and 29, this is before Noah was born. This is important, just hang with me. When Lamech, Noah's father, had lived 182 years, he fathered a son, and he called his name Noah, saying, out of the ground that the Lord has cursed, this one shall bring us relief from our work and from the painful toil of our hands. You look at who Noah was and who Noah represents. Noah was this one obedient man who brought deliverance for all of mankind. He was this one about whom his father said, I'm going to call him Noah, which means rest, because This one is going to bring us relief from the toil of our hands. Jesus is the greater Noah. He was the faithful one who was obedience on a cross. He took the wrath on himself. He was the one man who found favor in God's eyes. Noah was that one man who found favor in God's eyes. Jesus is the one man who found favor in God's eyes. And he granted us his favor on his behalf. And Jesus is the one man who has brought us relief from the toil of our hands. Jesus is the new and better and bigger and full Noah who offers a full remedy of all broken relationships. He's the one righteous, the one who found favor in God's eyes, the one obedient, the only one who could perfectly remedy all that was broken in Genesis 3. Ephesians 5:2 says, "Walk in love as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us, a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God," or a pleasing aroma. That the ultimate act of worship, the ultimate pleasing aroma to God was Jesus' death on a cross. That is the ultimate soother of God's wrath. Not just temporarily and not just partially, but wholly, fully, perfectly. In Jesus are we redeemed. Are things made right with God again, with creation again, and with each other again. It's only in Jesus that all of these broken things can be redeemed, can be remedied. And that's what the rainbow is the sign of. It's a sign and a reminder that God took wrath upon himself so that we could experience mercy. Now I'm telling you, this is the question again. Sin is real, now what? And this is the question that we all have to ask ourselves. Sin is real in my life, now what? Where do I go from here? I hope that this passage and that the rainbow and that this covenant and all these things make it clear that there's only one place to go. There's only one place where remedy can be found. And it's Jesus. Matt, will you come and close us? I will be down here. If you want to talk about finding that remedy in your life, if you want to pray, if you want to talk about baptism, if you want to talk about church membership, if you want to just come down and pray with me, I'll be down here.